Okay, everybody, I think we're live. So, welcome. Thank you all for being here for this conversation. As you know, I'm Dan. I go by Creation Myths, and I'm here with NephilimFree. So, Neph, why don't you take a few minutes, introduce yourself? And the idea is this is going to be just an informal conversation. Neph and I have talked as part of larger group streams, but never just kind of the two of us. So we're just going to chat about evolution and creationism for about an hour is the plan. So Neph, take it away. And Neph, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, okay, so I go by NephilimFree on YouTube. I've been doing creationist apologetics for about 13 years now. And I believed in evolution until I was in my mid-40s, or early to mid-40s. And then I became privy to some information that challenged it. And I spent 5 months studying everything I could about the subject. Because I was to come to believe that creation is true, I had to bury evolution theory so deep in the stratum of the earth that I could never, ever again doubt it. And that's what I did. I studied for 5 months. I was convinced evolution was false and creation was true long before that. But being the skeptic, hard to convince that I am, and the evidence believer in the weight of evidence that I do, I continued to study and study and study until I felt like it was absurd to continue to try to convince myself of something anymore. And I still study. I've always been kept at studying. So my contention, of course, is that creation has been verified by modern science, and that evolution theory was a myth that came about in the early 19th century. And I believe the single discovery that laid evolution to bed for all time was the discovery of DNA and its properties. It's now known that DNA is a four-dimensional package of information, which is strand hopping, forward and reverse reading, highly compressed information, which is organized and operates linguistically and operates algorithmically. And my contention is it's impossible for natural chemistry to produce information, algorithms, linguistics, or semiotics. And those are the properties of DNA. I think I would say this conclusively proves that intelligent design is a fact, and evolution theory is not only false, but absolutely impossible, scientifically impossible. So I could say more about that, but that's where I come from. So Dan, have you always believed in evolution?
I wouldn't even say believe in evolution. It's just the scientific position that I accept based on the weight of the evidence. So it's very much not a belief.
Well, how could evolution be true when DNA is information, linguistics, and algorithms, since natural processes cannot produce those things?
I disagree with the premise. I think it's I think you can describe DNA and DNA regulation in complex terms, in terms that sound like computer science or information theory. I think it's much more accurate and much more relevant to describe those things in terms of chemistry. And at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about biochemistry. And can you have molecules that have complex interactions, that have feedback loops, that have dependencies in terms of what happens when they interact with each other? Yeah, absolutely. It's just complex chemistry. It's certainly complex, but it's not complex in such a way that means it can't form through naturalistic processes. It's biochemistry. And there's nothing about complexity that makes it not able to evolve. Complexity itself is not a challenge to evolution.
Well, the problem I have with what you said is that it's been discovered that DNA is information which is algorithmic and operates linguistically. And those are things that can't be produced by non-intelligence. It sounds as though you're alluding that they can be. But the problem with that is intelligence is required. And let me give you a reason why. Algorithms have no mass or dimension. They're therefore not a physical property. They don't have any mass. Those are non-physical. They're in the non-physical domain. Everything can be divided into the physical domain and the non-physical domain. And it's irrational to believe that non-physical things can be produced by physical processes, but not irrational to believe that things that are non-physical can be produced by non-physical causation. So because of this, and also because algorithms are created by forward thinking and decision making, which are mental processes, not chemical ones. So there are no chemical processes involved in the production of an algorithm. They're mental processes. Now, if you say that, well, mental processes are chemical, but the problem with that is we get back to the fact that it's a non-physical thing. So are mental processes. But an algorithm doesn't exist physically. You can't put an algorithm in a mayonnaise jar and hand it to someone and say, here, see the algorithm? They say, no, I don't see anything. Because the algorithm, although we can write it on paper, that's semiotics. That's where we represent it in a medium, right? But the algorithm itself doesn't exist physically. Okay, so, and it requires forward thinking. So an algorithm is a process designed to accomplish a goal, and that requires forward thinking. Now, I hope you don't believe that chemistry can be forward thinking. Let me give you something to think about. All chemical interactions take place in the present only. They don't take place in the past. There are chemical reactions that have taken place in the past, and they're not taking place in the future. There will be chemical interactions that will take place in the future, but all chemical interactions in matter take place only in the now, right now. Okay, so why is it rational to believe? I'd say it's irrational to believe that chemical interactions between matter in molecules interacting in the present can consider and design something that should or should not take place in the future with a built-in choice-making process. That's not rational to me. So maybe you could explain why we should believe that chemicals can think about the future.
Well, so that actually, what you're describing in that chemical reactions, they're not forward thinking, they're just operating in the here and now. You're exactly right. And what you're describing is exactly how natural selection works. And the idea with what you're describing is that no one's making decisions. No one's trying to design anything here. You're just looking at chemical interactions. And what we see in things like DNA is exactly what you would expect if it was the product of chemical interactions. And I'll give you a concrete example because it's easy to describe things in ways that make them sound like there's more going on under the hood than there actually are. But for example, you look at DNA, A, T, C, and G. Well, that itself is one of the great questions of evolutionary biology. The cytosine there, as you and probably a bunch of the listeners know, cytosine is unstable. It's more unstable than the other bases, including uracil. So it's an open question of like, why cytosine? That's dumb. Why would you put cytosine in there? Why would you use cytosine? Now, I want to be clear. I'm not making a bad design argument. I'm making a this is what we'd expect from evolution argument. Because what we're seeing with cytosine and then how it interacts with thymine and uracil, like chemically, not in terms of base pairing, but I mean like chemically interacting, how those three molecules are related to each other. What we see is what we would expect if these molecules were the product of chemistry, because we're hypothesizing initially you get RNA. Now we know that random RNAs, you could polymerize a few hundred bases of RNA and you get biochemical activity. That's like really easy to do, but you have a problem because RNA uses uracil and cytosine, when it does this mutation called deamination, it's not a replication mutation, it's just a random biochemical thing. It just happens, probabilistically. When that happens, it turns into uracil. Well, that's a problem because now you have two sources of uracil. You have the things that should be uracil, and you have the things from cytosine. Now, what's the solution to that? Well, the solution is obviously get rid of cytosine because cytosine is dumb. But what we see instead is we get rid of uracil and we incorporate thymine instead in DNA rather than RNA. Now, that is exactly what you would expect based on the chemistry involved here. Because now we can go through, and we have these enzymes in our cells. You go through, and they just go, and anytime they see uracil in our DNA, they flip it back to cytosine. Our cells spend a ton of energy just doing that one thing. And I'm bringing up this example because it's a concrete example of the underlying chemistry of what you're talking about here, which doesn't require, there's no intelligence required to get that kind of thing. It's just exactly what you would expect if the chemicals were just coming together and interacting. And you can go back even further from before there was a genetic code, and the same thing you're saying applies. So you're talking about like that, well, it has to have a goal. No, you got a pool of chemicals. You know what you're going to select for? You're going to select for stability, and you're going to select for replication. You don't need any planning to do that thing. That's just going to happen by virtue of having diversity within this pool. So back over to you.
Well, natural selection doesn't start until life begins. It doesn't operate at the chemical level.
Nope, that's not true.
And Cytosine, in his presentation on ligands and hydroxypate, several scientists at the Salk Institute said there's no natural formation known for cytosine in nature. It's produced by cells only. It's not produced by Robert Shapiro, the famous biologist, published in the National Academy of Sciences that to favor cytosine production in an abiogenic environment is implausible. Implausible. So I don't think you could even get cytosine. But you didn't really address and you're saying natural selection can do it, but you really haven't addressed the issue. The issue is, how does natural selection produce forward thinking and decision making? Because those are products of algorithms. Algorithms are the characteristics of algorithms. Algorithms require forward thinking, and chemical interactions only take place in the present. They don't take place in the future. I don't see how it's logical to say that natural selection at the chemical level, which I don't see as plausible anyway, is certainly not in a biogenic sense, is going to be able to produce forward thinking and decision making. I still don't see a plausible explanation for mental processes to be produced by chemistry. What you're alluding to.
Now, if I can get in there, it's because you got a whole lot going on.
Well, you're alluding that an algorithm can be built in piecemeal over time. And the problem with that, Dan, is that algorithms have no fail-safe. They fail or they function. There is nothing in between. Nothing. So I just put
a paper a link to a paper in the chat of generating all four bases in a simulated early Earth environment. That's AU, I think it was ribo base, so I think it was AU, C, and G with 4 there. So, and that's a relatively new thing. That was from October of 2019. So, I mean, we can generate the 4 bases in plausible early Earth conditions. That's new, but that's something we've got plausible pathways to do that.
Well, Dan, we also know the history of evolutionists publishing papers and saying, look what nature could do. When, if you read the paper, you'll find that it was scientists experimenting and throwing out their experiment a dozen times before with intelligence, creating something in the lab, then turning around and declaring this is what nature did 1.4 billion years ago. I don't see that as evidence for anything.
I mean, that's how experiments work. We can't go back in time, can we?
But Dan, an algorithm can't be produced. An algorithm can't be produced piecemeal.
Well, that's what I wanted to, because the central question that or the central claim you're making here is that selection cannot operate prior to cells, is what it sounds like. Or I think you said life, but I take that to mean cellular life. Is that fair?
Well, yes, but the point is an algorithm can't be produced
I just
by
want
chemistry.
to clarify that. So now that is not true. Selection will operate on any population where there is variation and some difference in either resources that the members of that population need, or characteristics in that population that permit some individuals to persist for longer than others. Anytime you have variation of that nature, whether it's a cellular population, a multicellular population, or a chemical population, anytime you have that variation, you're going to have selection on that population. Now, initially, all you're selecting for is stability. And that should not be a controversial statement. If you have a pool of chemicals that are forming spontaneously, over time, that pool is going to be the most stable chemicals that can form spontaneously in that environment. The unstable ones are going to break down. The stable ones will accumulate. That shouldn't be controversial. That is selection.
Yeah, I think you're grossly misrepresenting it. Can you screen share what I've got? Trying to screen share something.
Just 1 second, because I really want to drill down on this point though, because do we agree on the dynamics that I just described?
No, I don't, because I don't believe an algorithm is possible to make an algorithm.
I'm not describing an algorithm. I'm not describing an algorithm. I'm describing a pool of chemicals that vary in their stability.
I don't believe that in chemical determinacy is able to produce the biological machinery or an algorithm.
Well, now that's a different question though, because I like I said, I went back to the original question of, can we have selection before cells? And the answer is yes. You can have selection before cells.
So I disagree.
Should be able to agree on that.
No, I don't. I don't believe chemical determinacy is able to create complex things. Now we're getting to the very heart of things. I think your idea about that is contrary to the knowledge of every chemist on the planet. No chemist knows of chemical determinacy which produces complex things. Not one.
I'm just talking about stability.
The job of every chemist in the world is to make matter do what it refuses to do otherwise. That's what a chemist's job is. Now, the point I'm trying to make is mental processes are involved in the production of algorithms. Algorithms require mental processes. They're built right in. Choice making. It's not plausible that natural selection and chemical determinacy can build in choice making. That's just an implausible idea.
Well, that is the common misconception with evolution, that there are conscious choices being made. And the fact of the matter is there aren't. Is there
really? Screen share what I'm trying to share, and you'll see.
Yeah, here, I'll share it. I'm gonna finish.
I'll show you an example.
Here you go.
What you see on the screen is an actual algorithm being performed by every cell in your body. Probably.
Look. I'm gonna make the point that I was making, and then you can explain the screen share. But the point I was making is that there's no decision-making going on in evolutionary processes. That's kind of the point, is that you have variation and no one's deciding what works or what doesn't work. It's just a matter of what happens to be successful under those conditions, right? So there's no decision-making at any point in this process. That's the fundamental mischaracterization there.
I agree. If evolution were true, it would be a purely chemical process, and I agree with that last statement. But that's not the case with algorithms. What you see on the screen is an actual algorithm being performed by every cell in your body. And it requires forward thinking, even setting up premises before action is taken. These are mental processes. They're not material ones. They're not chemical ones. Matter, it's irrational, Dan, to believe that chemistry, the determinacy, chemical determinacy, in other words, this molecule will bond with that one if it's in close enough proximity and at the right angle to the other one. And because of the nature of the bonds of those particular atoms in that molecule, it has nothing to do with making decisions. It's just chemical determinacy. I'd say it's irrational to believe that chemical determinacy can create the complexity, especially the mental processes of an algorithm. Can you cite any, as support for your claim, can you cite us any example where any chemist has demonstrated that chemical determinacy is able to create anything that's complex and functional?
I don't think anybody's making that specific claim, because now you're jumping about 10 steps in the process, right?
No, we're talking about algorithms. Algorithms are complex, and their algorithms are
concrete example. Can we look at a cellular example?
Algorithms are complex. They're specified. They're forward thinking. They're decision making. And they're complex. So
yes, and as I said before, complexity itself does not prevent evolution.
Well,
like, we have mechanisms to make complex things.
Well, what example has any chemist published that shows that matter naturally organizes itself into things that are complex and produce function?
Oh, well, here you go. There's the NEMI 2017 paper on the random assembly of RNA polymers and polypeptides. Let me pull that one.
No, that wasn't random. That was
no, it was random polymerization.
No, I've read the paper. You're misrepresenting it. It was coaxed The researchers changed the pH level. They even changed the polarity of the amino acids to get them to bond together. It was all engineered by intelligence. It didn't happen naturally.
So you're making two different claims about this paper, one of which is not relevant to the paper. So the relevant thing with this paper is that it shows that random assembly gets you activity, right? You can randomly assemble things and get functional information, however you're defining information.
No, the paper doesn't say any such thing as that.
It absolutely says that right there, Neff.
The researchers, that's their idea that nature did it.
No, that's not the claim that I'm making. That's not the claim I'm making. I'm making the claim that these random sequences, forget the underlying process of assembly. That doesn't matter. We're not making that claim. We're jumping around to a lot of things. This one is that randomly assembled things can have biochemical activity. That's what this demonstrates. Now, you can quibble about, let's go back to abiogenesis. How do these things form in the first place? Yeah, this paper doesn't address that because this paper isn't about that. But this paper is specifically about the idea that what you just said, that random things, chemically assembled things, cannot have whatever phrase you use, functional information, whatever, algorithm information.
Right.
Here's the evidence that that's just not true. So if you have a paper that refutes this one, by all means, I'll put it up on screen. But this shows exactly what you're asking for.
No, Dan, you're terribly misrepresenting the paper. The scientists that wrote that paper state that they coaxed the process along, the bonding of amino acids, all the way through by even changing concentration levels, polarity, and pH levels, and they repeated their experiment until they caused amino acids to bond into a chain. Okay, so it was all done with engineering. They used that engineering language. They say, we coaxed, we activated, we did this, we did that, we did the other. It's not something that was occurred in nature, Dan. You're terribly misrepresenting science. They did not observe anything complex arise naturally. No, Dan.
No,
they engineered.
They
engineered a chain. Let me finish a statement.
Well, you're misrepresenting what I said.
No, you're misrepresenting the paper. What they did was they forced amino acids to bond with each other by changing polarity and pH levels and activating it. Right. Okay.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but that's not the claim I'm making.
Okay. So what you're claiming is that an algorithm, the complexity necessary for and the complexity and function necessary to produce a genetic algorithm can arise by chemical determinacy. And I asked you to cite scientific evidence that supports that idea. You cite this paper and misrepresent it by showing a paper wherein the scientists coaxed the process in numerous different ways throughout the experiment until they got it.
Now I'm going to take a turn now.
What I'm asking you for is that nature can do it. Chemicals naturally do it by chemical determinacy. That paper doesn't show any such thing.
I absolutely hear you, but you are claiming that I made a claim about that paper that I did not make, right?
Well, I just answer my question. Then.
Okay. I did not claim that paper shows that these things happen naturally. That's not what that paper is about. That paper is about the ability of randomly generated sequences to have biochemical activity. That's what that paper shows. Now, if you want to claim that they set up the experiment to polymerize the things, yeah, absolutely. Of course they did. They weren't doing abiogenesis there. They were showing that random sequences can have activity. Now, the way to refute that would be to show that the sequences themselves were not random, right? That's the way to refute that paper. But they're very clear in their methods. They did nothing to dictate the sequence of those molecules that they found that have activity. That's the thing there. Now, there's another paper that I love. It's one of my favorite papers of all time that I think maybe gets at where I might not have opened it. Sorry, hang on a second. Here we go.
But about that, you still misrepresented it because my question was, can you show us where chemists will state that they have observed that natural chemistry produces things that are complex and functional, and you did not address that. Instead, you're pointing to a paper, and you're expecting me to think that this answers that question, but it does not. Can
you define complex in a way that is measurable here? Because I can give you other papers on things like the assembly of molecules, the assembly of vesicles and lipid structures, but how are we defining complex here? Because otherwise I'm just going to be playing whack-a-mole, just like I was with Kent the other day, where I'll give you a thing and then he says, no, that doesn't count. I give you another thing. Oh, that doesn't count. So like, can we get a definition here of like, what's that threshold for what nature cannot do?
Well, what were we talking about? We were talking about an algorithm which has forward thinking and decision-making processes. All right. Now, hold on. So I'm asking you to, that's function. Those are functions. Algorithms are indeed complex. Okay. So I'm asking you to explain how chemical determinacy is rational or plausible to believe that chemical determinacy in molecules produces something that's complex and functional in relation to what we were discussing, not in the simplified dumbed down sense, which is what all evolutionists love to do, try to simplify things so small and say, look, we got two molecules bond, thus it all could happen. But that's not what we're getting at. So I'm asking you, an algorithm is the subject. DNA operates algorithmically. I state this is empirical evidence that life was designed and evolution is false. So something relating to the function of an algorithm, which is decision making and forward thinking. Can you explain why it's plausible to believe that type of complexity can arise because of chemical determinacy?
Yes, and here's an example of that. Now, I would love for you to be able to provide a specific example of what this would look like biologically. So, for example, I'm really fond of talking about a protein, teeny little protein in HIV called VPU that has a new function in HIV relative to the chimpanzee SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, that it evolved from. Now, I don't know if that counts for you, but that is, by Behe's definition, an irreducible, novel biochemical trait, specifically adapted to part of the human immune system that's different from the chimp immune system. So, like, if that would count, we can talk about that. My feeling is you're going to say that doesn't count. But here's a really interesting paper. And for anyone watching, I strongly recommend, if you're interested in anything about early life chemistry, this is one of my favorite papers because it's all about why we use cytosine and thymine and uracil and how these things interact. And this gets, I think, at what you're getting at here, which is that, how do we build this system from the ground up without some intelligent input? Well, this paper really gets into it, and it talks about like the early Earth biochemistry of how these different things interacted and how by happenstance we ended up with cytosine and what problems that caused, and then how things adapted to deal with those problems. Again, not in like an optimal way, but in a, kind of sort of works way. Until we evolve something else like methylation, and then it messes with it again. And so my two questions here are like, is this what you're looking for? Like origin of the genetic code kind of stuff? Or is like biochemical functions, like new biochemical functions during a niche expansion? Like, is that the kind of thing you're looking for? Because I have to admit, I'm not a computer science, and I'm not a philosopher. So like, you can say big philosophy and computer sounding words at me, and I'm going to just point you right back to biological examples because that's what I know. So is there a specific thing that you're pointing to say either this is the kind of thing I'm talking about or this is the kind of thing that can't happen?
Well, firstly, everything you just described is in the imagination of men. They're not talking about what was observed. They're talking about what they believe could have happened and should have happened and likely happened in the primordial past. That's not observable, testable, repeatable science. Secondly, it should have gone without saying, since we're talking about genetic algorithms, let me just lay something on the table for you to consider about what a genetic algorithm does. Genetic algorithms.
I know. I've written genetic algorithms.
Genetic algorithms their function depends upon interdependency between bits of information that are hundreds, thousands, or millions of base pairs away from each other on the DNA molecule. Now, your idea about chemical determinacy, let's compare that. Okay, chemicals act or interact with each other only when they're in immediate proximity to each other, not when they're hundreds, millions, or thousands or millions of base pairs away from each other on a gigantic long molecule that, if it were the size of a rope, would be hundreds of miles long. Okay, so wait, it is true because wait. genetic algorithms require are based upon interdependencies between bits of information that are of vast distances from each other on the DNA molecule.
Sometimes even different molecules.
Chemical determinacy could only take place when molecules are in immediate proximity to each other. So we have decision making and we're prescribing activities in molecules way over here about molecules, the aboutness problem of mind, about molecules that are way down there. They're not in proximity to each other. And so you see, your chemical determinacy,
what you're describing is not comport with what goes on in nuclei.
Your chemical determinacy
here, I do need to jump in for a second, because one rule that I've set for myself here is I think Neph left. I don't know if his connection cut out or what, but it looks like he left. So I'm going to wait a minute. I'm going to see if he can get back in here. What I was saying was, one rule I set for myself here in these conversations is I'm not going to let people say things that are not true, like just straight up not true about specific things. And that rule is going to hold. So yeah. I don't know if Neph left or if he lost his connection. The connection seemed fine. I'm going to just hop over to my email real fast. Stand by, everybody. This is the nature of a live broadcast, I think. So here we are. Hang on one second. Let's see. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. Now, while we're chilling, I have figured this was planned to go until 9, so I can let's see. I just emailed Neph and see if he was having a connection problem or if he left on purpose. But let's see. Is he in the chat? Well, okay, Neph, you should come back in. I don't know if you heard the part about where I was not going to let people just say things that are blatantly not true. So you can come back, or you can not. It's totally fine with me. Well, I'm here for another 28 minutes. So if anybody would like to, any creationists in here want to come in and have a creation conversation? Yeah, it seems that way. Now, Neph, I don't know if you're still here, but no, I was doing a timer. It just never got to the limit. I was setting a timer for both of us, but neither one of us hit the limit. So that wasn't the problem. It was that I if you're going to say something like that, things can, like just basic biological facts, like things can't interact over long distances, then I'm going to say, no, we got to just correct that for the record before you finish. And that's just how I'm going to operate. Now, if that's a problem, then I guess that's the end of the conversation. But I mean, so let's see. Here, let's get, here, you know what? Here, we're just gonna turn this into a little bit of a thing. So you know what? Here, let's do, let me see. I got the link right here. So here you go, everybody. Andrew, why don't you come on in? We can talk. Here you go. So I put the link in the chat. See who wants to pop in and we can chat about stuff. Andrew, I know you, come on in. Let's see, who else said stuff? Neph, if you're welcome to come back if you want. But like I said, there's basic biology, and we're not gonna not say things about basic biology that are wrong. I'm not gonna let you finish if you say. You did say I'm not gonna let you finish if you say wrong thing. Yes, that's right. Like you're not going to say facts that are just like not true. So like if you're going to claim, for example, that things in the nucleus cannot interact over long distances, then I'm gonna just cut in and say, no, that's actually not true. And if that's a problem, then I guess it's going to be a short conversation. Okay. So I'm going to bring Andrew in here, and I'm going to Andrew. Welcome, Andrew. Would you care to introduce yourself for a minute? And then also the Dapper Dinosaur is here. In fact, we're going to call him Dr. What was it? Dr. Dapper Dinosaur? Is that the correct title here?
See here?
Hey, Andrew, take a minute to introduce yourself. Standing, you want to come in? You are welcome to come in too.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'd like to say thanks for letting me on. It's a pleasure speaking with you. I'm basically currently a high school student here in Southern California. I'm very much fascinated by the topics of evolution, genetics, and I guess recently development. And yeah, thanks for letting me on, and I hope I can talk about evolution with you guys.
Hey, yeah, welcome. And before you go any further, I just want to say I caught some of the I think it was the Kent debate after show from the other night that you were on over on logical, plausible, probable, and nice job.
Oh, thank
you. I think you were on that for a bit, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Nice job. Thank you. I caught some of that conversation. That was enjoyable to listen to. I just want to address people in the chat real fast. Yeah, look, the point of a conversation with somebody you disagree with is like to air the disagreements and try to get to the base of those disagreements. But like there are basic facts that we have to be able to agree on. And like I am perfectly willing to entertain a guest that is going to say like what a paper says is not what that paper says. And we obviously hash that out, right? That is perfectly fine. And that is the point of these conversations. But I'm not going to have people on that are just going to tell me 2 + 2 = 5. Like if you say that, I'm going to like say, no, we got to correct that for the record before we continue on. So
yeah,
that's the thing.
That's kind of the reason I came in, is to say that this is honestly why when you asked if I thought that having Nephi on was a good idea, I said there's really no point. Because Nephi does 2 things. He rambles, and then in his ramble, he will say 14 or 15 things that are just factually incorrect. And if you try to say, hold on a second, before we go on, he'll rage quit almost immediately. He did it on my channel. He does it on other people's channels.
Here we go.
He does it on Modern Day Debate.
Continuing the tradition.
The other thing is, I don't know what your time limit was for Nephi, but I feel like for statements, I feel like you got to give him
letting 5 minutes go.
For statements, I feel like Nephi can't be let ramble for more than about 3 minutes, or else he will go into some weird rabbit hole that makes no sense. And for questions, you got to give him like 45 seconds, because his questions turn into paragraph-long dissertations on nonsense.
Yeah,
that's just flat out how Nephi operates. He is just there to make everything as confusing as possible, so that what he says is so incoherent you don't even know where to begin trying to address it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the point of this format, as opposed to a formal debate, is to just have an unstructured conversation,
right? Which
is fine if we don't have specific, if it's not a super tight time limit, that is perfectly fine. So I had set on my clock, I had been timing 5 minutes on and off, and neither one of us had gotten to 5 minutes in any one of our statements. And that's fine.
That's at least very fair. So,
but it hadn't even gotten close enough to 5 minutes for me to say I'm imposing a 5-minute time limit, right? Yeah. But I had been timing it. But like you can't just say things that are just cut and dry not true. Like that's just not allowed. And look, that's how I'm going to operate this channel and these conversations, and different venues are going to do it differently, and that's fine. But like that's how I'm going to operate, and that's people can, if people don't like that, then they can leave, I suppose. And that's just how it is. So, Andrew, go ahead. I'm going to bring Walking Fish in here too. So, Andrew, go ahead, and then we'll get to Walking Fish. And like I said, everybody, this is going to be about an hour long total, so we'll go for another about 22-ish minutes. And if anyone has any questions in the chat, feel free, and we can field them. Questions for any of us, go for it. Andrew, the floor is yours.
All right. So, well, first of all, I think that Neph possibly, and this is just my guess, maybe he didn't know it was an informal conversation, perhaps. Maybe he thought it was a debate. I don't know. Maybe that's just his mentality. But I did have a question for you, Dr. Dan, if that's all right.
Absolutely. I do just want to say Neff and I were online together for about 10 minutes before we started, and he was well aware this was an informal conversation. Yeah, this was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
We actually talked about how this was an informal conversation, but maybe down the road we could do a formal structured debate on a specific topic. So
okay.
that, yeah. But go ahead with your
Sorry
question. I'd be
about
happy
that.
to answer it.
So yeah, as I was saying earlier, I'm kind of interested in the developmental mechanisms specifically related to evolution. And I want to ask you or two questions that are related to each other. First of all, what are your feelings on the relationship between mutations to regulatory elements and that kind of contributing to like differences in body designs and like morphologies changing over time? And then the second question related to that was, is it theoretically possible for I guess smaller scale mutations to lead to such changes as well?
So the first thing is unrelated to the questions. And if you're really into like evolution and like developmental processes, if you haven't read the book Your Inner Fish by Neil Shubin, I cannot recommend that book enough. It is delightful. And it gets into this exact thing.
In fact, one thing that I think you'll find very interesting is that similar intentional changes in signaling pattern, either chemically in the embryo or with genetic engineering, basically, will result in similar structural changes in groups as diverse as tetrapods, ray fin fish, and even chondrichthyes, the ray or the cartilaginous fish like rays and skates and sharks. It's absolutely amazing the degree to which there's this strong correlation between the regulatory pathways resulting in ontological development between these far-flung groups of life. Even flies can be affected.
I'm going to pull up a picture real fast if I can find it while we're talking about stuff that shows basically that with flies. It's fascinating. But to your other questions. Oh, by the way, Andrew, in the chat, Rational Mind has a paper there that you might find interesting. So in where would I find this picture? I'm gonna just see if I can find it real fast. Sorry, this will just take a second.
Well, while we're not talking, I guess I'll hype up Your Inner Fish as well, because that's such a good book. That was one of the books that made me leave creationism, so that's a fun one.
There you go.
Wow.
So, but going to your question, so you have, it's a lot of these changes are regulatory in nature. You're not specifically changing like alleles, for example. You're changing when and where specific genes are expressed, or for how long a certain thing is expressed. Right. And a really fun example of this is in snakes compared to other tetrapods, because there are genes that suppress limb growth, and in most tetrapods, those genes are expressed in between the limbs. But for snakes, they're expressed along the whole body. So you would think there's that's complicated. Legs, no legs. Well, not that complicated. It's just a matter of expressing a different combination of genes in the places where the legs grow.
Yeah. That's one of the ways.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I'll just go quick. That's one of the reasons why you get the really long torsos in snakes, because snakes have a short neck and a ridiculously long torso and a very long tail. And one of the ways you can tell externally is where's the cloaca, because the cloaca is always anterior to the tail, and snakes have a very short tail. But if you look at glass lizards, which are another group of lizards that have convergently evolved leglessness, the cloaca is very close to the head. It's because they have extremely short torsos and extremely long tails. And so you can tell that there has to be a different signaling pattern to get this leglessness, but with a tiny torso and an absurd tail. But just looking from the top down, you would never know that without looking at the skeleton or the organs or anything.
Right. And I would just like to add, or I guess make a statement that some other people have mentioned this, that the regulatory elements that I'm specifically talking about, like enhancers, promoters, silencers, all of that, which I'm guessing you're aware of. If changes in those, I guess those would have changes in the cascade that as the embryo develops, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%.
Each are turned on and off.
I can't think of a specific enhancer off the top of my head. in terms of things where you're going to like really upregulate gene expression in a specific like morphological feature. But I can think of for humans, you have the lactase persistence is the two main alleles for lactase persistence that allow you to digest lactose as an adult. The two main alleles for that are actually within an enhancer in an upstream gene in an intron, and it greatly increases the affinity of that enhancer for transcription factors. Kind of more broadly, if you look right here, this is a phenomenon called deep homology, where you have analogous traits, right? You have analogous morphological characters, legs in this case, in vertebrates and in arthropods. But the underlying regulatory mechanisms for those legs are the same developmentally. So you could look here, you have a gene called hedgehog in arthropods, it's HH. Right. You have the homologous gene sonic hedgehog in vertebrates. These genes are all homologous to each other, and they all do basically the same thing. They cause this cascade causes elongation away from the midline of the body. And the common ancestor of flies and mice, they didn't have legs, but they had these genes. And these genes, when they interact in this way, or when I should say that when the gene products interact in this way, you end up elongating away from the body. You get legs or antenna, or whatever the case may be. But I think that kind of gets at what you're talking about.
Dan, I just want to point out to a bit of orange on the off chance that he's watching. Yes, Sonic Hedgehog is a real thing, despite your incredulity.
Yep, there's a real thing because scientists are a bunch of geeks and nerds. So that was in the 90s. They discovered that. They had already named Hedgehog because it made the flies spiky, so they named it Hedgehog. So then when they discovered the mammal version, it was right at the heyday of Sonic at Sega Genesis, so they named the gene Sonic Hedgehog. That's a true story.
So when you say these regulatory genes are homologous, there can be mutations and tweaks to them, I guess, still, correct? That's why they're definitely not exactly the same.
Yeah, they're not exactly like base identity. They're not 100. Okay. No, they're not 100%. And the proteins they make are actually quite divergent from each other because of things like you could have amino acids that are biochemically interchangeable, basically, but the codons are different. So you end up with a protein that's actually more divergent than the DNA sequence. And that happens, and you end up with functionally the same protein. You don't actually need to be that similar. By the way, I do want to just signal boost something that Dapper said a few minutes ago. If there are any creationists in the chat that want to pop in, you are welcome to pop in. We're going to be online for another 13 minutes or so, and this was originally a chat with NephilimFree about evolution and creationism, and it turned into just a chat about evolution and creationism with some other delightful people. So, Walker, we haven't heard from you yet specifically. What would you like to talk about?
Oh God. No, I was just shutting up and letting y'all talk.
Well, I do want to. Let me plug Walker's channel and say that if you want to see a very tight, very concise, very crystal clear video on why genetic entropy is hogwash, you should watch his video. It's really good.
Oh God, I thought your video was incredible on that topic. It was much more in depth than anything I did. Mine was sort of from a undergraduate perspective.
Yeah, but mine was half an hour long. Nobody wants to sit for half an hour. Nobody wants a bio lesson.
Yeah. Currently, I'm trying to get. Oh, sorry. What?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I'm
I was
sorry.
just going to say, currently, I'm working on hopefully the most comprehensive guide to proboscidea and phylogeny on YouTube. So that'll be neat.
That sounds exciting. By the way, Dan, one quick thing is, you literally teach thousands of people a year. People want bio lessons, trust me.
Thousands is pushing it.
Okay.
Thousand-ish?
Okay, about 1,000 or so people a year. So clearly there are people who want bio lessons. Also, you're not the only person doing that job. Not even in the United States. So yes, people want bio lessons.
Okay, fair point, but I do have kind of a captive audience. Like, if they get up and leave, that's rude.
Well, okay, but they also paid to be there.
That's also true. Yes. Hey, yeah. Let's get Lane. The link is in the chat somewhere, but here you go. I'll put it in again. Come on in, Lane.
Didn't you say you taught bio? Good.
Oh, sorry. I just want to clarify one last thing, if that's all right.
By all means, yeah.
You addressed my first question. I just want to see If these regulatory mutations to regulatory genes and switches, I guess I should say, are so drastic or I guess important for the evolution of body parts, do small scale mutations to like single nucleotides or duplication events, for instance, do small scale mutations like that still play some kind of role?
Absolutely. Especially things, so it's kind of, where do you draw the line with big and small, right? I think, a gene duplication is typically considered pretty major. But I mean, so I'll give you an example of a gene duplication followed by some tweaks that lead to some really cool new traits. Opsins in our eyes, the actual proteins that detect the photons, these are from a family of proteins called serpentine proteins. And the main things are called the main kind of group of those are G protein coupled receptors. They're receptors that are involved in all sorts of signaling, like hormones and a bunch of other things. And there's a group of them, and they're all related evolutionarily. So they're through sequential gene duplication events and also genome duplications. But then there's a small subset of these, the opsins, that mutated, and instead of being sensitive to a chemical substrate, they are sensitive to a photon of a specific wavelength. And this is what actually allows you to translate the photon from the light into a cellular signal, a chemical signal inside your cells. It's this group of proteins called opsins. And everything that has eyes uses opsins, even though the common ancestor of everything with opsins does not have eyes. And it's just a couple little mutations that tweak them from being sensitive to chemicals to sensitive to photons. And that has happened multiple times in the history of animal life. I think everything with eyes uses opsins. Even if there's slightly different mutations that do it, they've all found different solutions to it. So that's an example of a very small change that has unlocked a lot of potential for new traits.
One of my favorite I was just going to say, one of my favorite related examples to that is that the medium wave and the long wave opsins were actually caused by a duplication event in our last common ancestor with Old World and New World monkeys.
That's cool.
And then in the genus Allelidae, so in all New World monkeys, they work as separate alleles on the same loci, the medium wave and long wave. So every New World monkey, except for howler monkeys, are dichromatic. And then there was a recombination, like a mistake in the recombination that basically made where the genes overlap.
Yeah, it was the unequal crossing over.
Yeah, and so now howler monkeys actually have both the long wave and the medium wave instead of just having them at the same loci.
Nice.
That's a cool one.
Right.
That's super cool. I'm filing that one away. That's cool.
Yeah.
I think one professor I talked to summed it up nicely that that when I mentioned these kinds of changes to him, for instance, he said that it's basically all possible kinds of mutations can contribute to new structures and functions, basically. And I think all of us would agree with that, right? That it can include big and small, however you want to define it, types of mutations.
Hey guys, I'm going to take off because I've got a whole bunch of other people who are trying to clamor for my attention. But thank you for having me on, Andrew. It was very nice to get to talk to you for the first time, although we didn't really converse very much. But I would be open
sorry,
to
I'm not trying to.
No worries. I'm just saying I would be very much like to have further conversations. Find me on Twitter or something, and we can talk. To you, Lane, it's good to see you. I'll talk to you later. And Walking Fish, is this the first time we've been live together?
Yep.
Awesome.
Physically,
we'll have to repeat it sometime. But thank you very much, guys. If you're watching this, Kent with Bent is tomorrow. It's Kent with Bent 33. The cabinet or the Kent or the Hoven in the Woods. I can remember it. All right, bye everybody.
Come on, get it right.
I know, right? Well, the name and the thumbnail went through several iterations, so that's my defense. Okay.
All right,
bye, everyone.
Thanks for dropping by. See you later.
Sorry about that. I'm not trying to hog all of the questions right now.
You're good. You're great.
I'm talking to you.
You're good. Hey, TD, what's on your mind?
Oh, I'm here because I was trying to get standing to give sources for Habilis being artificial. He listed some names of experts. Leaky, I'm going to need to confirm whether or not Leaky has that position. One of them, I could not confirm it, as a lot of his work is ancient and very much not accessible. And the last two were Swartz and Tattersall, who wrote a lot of work together. But as of 2010, they were considering Homo habilis a fully valid taxon. So I don't know where Standing's getting this from.
I mean, that's, as you know, my relatively limited understanding of human ancestry within the genus Homo is that habilis is generally considered a valid taxon. That is my understanding, and I am not an expert in that, but I have read enough of the literature to teach a lecture on human evolution a couple times a year, and I've never heard of the arguments that Standing is making.
Yeah, he's relying on one paper for Sadiba, which we corrected on him on in full, and he continues to say, even though one of the authors of that paper has gone back and is saying that Sadiba is valid now. And Standing's only response to that is wrong. It's like...
By the way, if Standing for Truth, if you're here, you're welcome to pop in for a few minutes.
I think he left.
He probably left. But I mean, you're welcome. I have an open invitation out to Standing to talk about whatever. But hasn't taken me up on it. But maybe he will at some point.
Yeah,
but I would love to talk. I mean, there's other quibbles with his ideas of human ancestry, like the idea that Neanderthals are descended from Homo sapiens, which is contradicted by all the genetic evidence. And I'm going to have a video on that out at some point in the next few days, I hope. It just doesn't make any sense. So if anyone wants to talk about that, I am happy to. Yeah. So everybody, it is 8:56. The point we were going to go until 9. So I'm just going to go around the horn and final questions or final thoughts. Then we'll wrap this up and say goodnight and say thank you to everyone who's watching here. I appreciate you coming from what turned into a shorter than expected conversation with NephilimFree. Andrew, what do you got? Andrew, I know I've seen you in streams and things. Are you making stuff? Do you have a channel? Is there anything we can promote in your direction?
I guess I don't have a channel, but I guess if you accept evolution and you're willing to chat, I am more than happy to make new friends and chat online on StreamYard, things like that. So I guess that's pretty much it. I guess my question is kind of a summary one, that like when creationists say, for instance, that mutations destroy information, or they only scramble information, they don't create new information. I just want to see if a combination of mutations to regulatory regions and genes, point mutations and duplications, if in different circumstances, like those changes can add up and accumulate over time to give new structures and functions. And I want to see what you thought about that.
We should definitely talk about that sometime, because that is a super fun question. And I love that question. And I also love the creationist side of that, of like, well, you can't get new stuff. It's like, well, you can get new stuff. And a lot of times it ends up kind of like what we saw here, of just a rolling backwards down to abiogenesis, right, which is not the point of the conversation, but that's okay.
I think so. You would agree that most changes are modifications of existing structures or functions, correct?
Yeah. That's mostly how evolution works. You're taking something pre-existing and you're tweaking it to get something new. And if it's beneficial, it gets selected for in the context of all the other stuff that's existing, which is complicated. It's not easy to do. And it's rare, but like that's the process. And we have like concrete examples of that. So yeah, I'm going to kick it over to Lane.
I was enjoying this until Nephi left. I'm disappointed I didn't get to ask a question during Q&A, which was, what is a carbohydrate? And I was going to be for both of you with Nephi answering first. I
appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm a cruel man.
I appreciate having my counterpart answer first, so I could crib their answers and not have to come up with the answer off the top of my head.
Yeah. And like the final thing is, when people ask to give for a citation to a paper, when you say you have experts, we mean the actual paper name, not just the name of the authors, because that doesn't help. Especially when two of them were co-writing papers since the 90s. and they did a lot.
Yes.
Ah.
And Walker, last words are yours.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just touching on the point that TD Lane just said, oh my God, Maddox does that all the time where he's just like, I'm not going to do your homework for you. Here's an author. Go look it up. And it's like, dude, this author's written hundreds of papers. Do you expect me to parse through all of them to find this like one specific quote mine in context?
Yep.
It's so frustrating.
He did that to me about 2 weeks ago. And I said, look, if you just give me the paper and it says what you say it does, then you'll have an easy win. Because I'll just say, wow, that's cool. I just learned something new. And like, you wouldn't do it. And so I ended up finding it later on. He mentioned something more about it later on, and I was able to find it. And spoiler, didn't show what he said it showed. Not even close. But like, that's not how you win. This gets at the question that I want to ask, and this is a conversation. This is for any creationist. This is a conversation I want to have, is who is your audience and why do you take the approach you do? Because I can never tell if this is an exercise to reassure the people who already agree with you or to convince people who don't that you are right on the science. And those are two very different exercises. And it is often presented as convincing people on the science while being conducted as an exercise in reassuring your own side. And those two things are incompatible. And I would love to explore why people take the approach they do.
Yeah.
And that is a good, and John is a good example of that.
Yeah.
So John, if you happen to watch this, if you know, I roll snake eyes and you just happen to watch this, open offer to come on and talk about that because I'm curious.
Yeah. Otherwise, though, I'm enjoying the one-on-one series you do. I think that's a lot better of a format than just, hey, whoever comes on can talk to all 7 creationists at the same time.
Yeah.
I feel like that's not very productive. So, yeah. Other than that, I enjoy it.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, 3, and thank you, Dapper, for coming on, and thank you, Neff, for being here for as long as you were here. I was enjoying our conversation. Wish you could have stayed longer. Just so everyone knows, I'm going to continue doing the creation myths stuff. As far as just about one a week, I'm aiming for just a new creation myth. The next one coming up is that Neanderthals are descended from Homo sapiens, which I'm super duper not. So that's going to be next. And then I'm going to try to keep the creation conversations going. Seems like Monday nights are when that happens, but I can't promise that's going to be the case going forward. I did have a nice chat with Smokey on one of his streams a couple weeks ago that I'm going to put over on my channel, just clip out our little bit of it. And that was a really fun conversation. So that'll go in that series too. So yeah, everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And we'll be back with more conversations at some point. I don't know exactly when. But yeah, thanks everybody. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks.